So the reason I put you on here is because you are the most linguistically capable person that I know when
Boy,
it comes into. No, I know. So setting a heavy stage for you, but you know more about language randomly than anybody that I know. Because here's the thing: there are people who can speak more languages, but I feel like no one else is able to ever give me the history behind a word that you can.
sometimes I do, because I find it interesting. And when somebody else explains that, I listen and I try to remember, because that's really, I find that fascinating, the etymology.
Yes.
Um,
By the way, that etymology is what, the history or study of a language?
of words,
Okay. Okay.
the evolution of words, the history of the word. Etymological dictionaries are really very valuable and most interesting. I have a really old one that's a reprint. It's almost like a doorstop. Um, a lot of that stuff you find on Wi-Fi, on internet now, Wikipedia, etc. But you don't always find everything. And thank goodness you still have to go to books once in a while. One of the things that I got rid of and I regret when I moved was 20 consecutive almanacs.
Oh, that's
The
cool.
almanac and Book of World Facts or whatever. I bought the new one every January.
From what 20-year time span?
Oh God, up until about when I moved, 2020. So it was like from 2000 to 2020, 25, 24.
Okay.
And I just thought it's for my needs, not my curiosity, but for my needs. I'm going to only need Wikipedia probably. I was no longer teaching a language class except for Scots Gaelic, and that had a totally different set of reference books.
Okay.
And also the Fachlr Nanine, the dictionary online. That was a blessing from Salmore Ostig, the Gaelic language college on the Isle of Skye in Western Scotland, the Hebrides. And when I went there, one of the most important things that I discovered were the different dictionaries. And as I studied and joined a class, the different teachers would have different dictionaries. And of course, if one of the dictionaries was repeated by more than one or two teachers, I definitely got.
Well, question. You bring up like being in Scotland. So I'm always someone who associates Gaelic with Irish people, and yet all of your time was actually in Scotland, correct?
Right.
Okay. So then how is it that where did the language come from originally?
Well, it's a Celtic language that the Irish, we're going to call them the Irish, or we can call them the Irish Celts. Um, the theory that I adhere to, that I like the most, is that they migrated across Europe as all the Celtic tribes did. I mean, the Germani in Germany were Celtic. The Franks in France are Celtic. The northern Scotland, the Celts. The Iberian Celts, the Ibero-Celts, um, conquered most of the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal. Viriatu was probably a Celtic warrior in northern Portugal who fought the Romans. But one of the most prevalent beliefs is that they sailed out of southwestern France and northwestern Spain, the two corners of the separate countries that touch each other there, the Bay of Biscay. And they sailed out, and the wind currents, the North Atlantic wind currents, carried them. And the North Atlantic wind currents came down Europe, came south along the face of Europe, and then turned at the Teju River. The Teju being English called the Tahoe, or the Tagus. The Spanish call it Tahoe, and the Portuguese, of course, call it the Tajo. And it flows across the middle of Spain past Toledo, and then across to Lisbon, and empties into the Lisbon Bay, the Lisbon Harbor, which is one of the largest natural harbors in the world. And the river was so strong that that's where it cut the southern flow of the North Atlantic waters and sent them back up in a U-turn. And they went back up, and they hit land on the western side of Ireland. And those Celts landed. And what most people miss, and it's not referenced very often, but every now and then you'll come across a historian or a linguist who will point out the irony of the fact that one tribe that landed on the western side of Ireland migrated across Ireland, mixing with the few people they met there. And then from around the coast near current-day Dublin, they then jumped across the very short distance, which is one of the reasons why the Irish and the Scots have so much in common. They went across the Irish Channel there and landed in Hibernia, the western side of Scotland. And the most fascinating fact that I just only learned within the last 5 years is that wave of Celtic people were actually called the Scoti.
Okay. Is that where Scottish comes from?
That's where the word Scotland comes from.
Okay.
And they were the Irish migrating. We call them the Irish, and they take their name from the island, I believe. I'm not positive about that, but they migrated across the water a very short distance to western Scotland, western central Scotland, and they encountered the Picts. And of course, the same thing Ireland had, Viking establishments. Viking raiders had set up trading posts or raiding posts. So that's why in Ireland, almost all of the major cities are on the coast. They all originated from Viking and Celtic landings. And northern Scotland is the same, but the Scots integrated into the central portion of Scotland more than the Irish.
When the Celts got there, was English already on the island of Great Britain? Like, was it established?
England was in the southern part.
Mm-hmm. So was English already a thing happening in the world?
Well, it wasn't English. It was Angles, it was Sussex, it was Wessex, it was Northumberland. It was all these little kingdoms that were trying to become one kingdom themselves. But what we call Irish encountered when they migrated into Western Scotland, current-day Scotland, they ran into the Picts, which were the warlike natives that painted their bodies blue, and that's where they get their name, Pict. It's from Old Latin, from the Romans, meaning painted. And they painted themselves for battle. It's not something that all the Celts did, but it was what the Picts did, and they're named for that. And the Irish ran into the Picts and the Vikings. A small number of Vikings along the coast and the Picts everywhere. And the Irish and the Picts eventually, I don't remember much about super wars, but they intermarried. And Kenneth MacAlpine was the Pictish leader who married one of the Irish princesses. One of the warlords of the Irish had a daughter that he gave to Kenneth MacAlpine, and he became the first king of Scotland. What they can consider the first king of Scotland.
For reference, like what years are we talking?
Oh, I'd have to look that up. I'm sorry.
No, you go. I mean, but like 700, 1100, 1300, like around those eras?
I really hate to say.
No worries, no worries. Okay.
I've looked it up so many times, and I always, why do I forget it? I don't know.
Well, because this makes me think of the early part of the book. It was Winston Churchill wrote it, a history of the English-speaking people.
I have it on the shelf.
Great read. So interesting.
Volume 1. Volume 1 is what I've got 2 copies of. I can't remember the title, but it's about the beginning of the creation of modern day and the English and Scottish wars. But the Irish and the Scots got their name, ironically, from the Celtic tribe that migrated across. And the Irish got their name from the island, I believe. And when you talk about Gaelic is the word in Scottish Gaelic and in Irish Gaelic. They're almost the same word. They're very similar, but they are pronounced different.
How long have you spoken Gaelic for?
Well, I've studied it and played with it for about 20 years. And it's very complicated, and I've not attacked it with the ferociousness that I attacked French or Portuguese. It's been something I've toyed with and played with, and it's always been the third thing going in my life, besides my other, fetishes. But in Britain, when you say Gaelic, you should be talking about Scottish Gaelic. When you want to talk about Irish Gaelic, you either say Irish Gaelic or you say Irish. And that's a national pride factor. They've decided to call it Irish rather than pronouncing it in Irish Gaelic.
Okay.
And the Scots pronounce it in Scottish Gaelic. And it's very similar, but yet when people ask me to pronounce something in Gaelic, I ask them which one. And they're often amused by the fact that there are two. And then they're confused by the fact that it's so different.
Yeah.
I would never pretend to know how to pronounce Irish Gaelic.
Like they're more different than American English to British English?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I would imagine.
Because I could still pronounce everything the Brits want to say. I might not say it with that Cockney accent, but I can talk.
Well, and the Brits have got regional accents that are really, unbelievably different.
It's crazy how different, considering how small of a place it is. Maybe the regional identifiers were more important because you're on an island, because you have to really kind of like stamp your claim with a neighborhood or anything. Because they have, practically one street to a next new accents in downtown London. That's kind of unheard of anywhere you go here.
Yeah, we've got regional pronunciations, but they're not that different.
Yeah, New York City would be one of the only cities that you could identify multiple New York type accents. And even like a layman person could do that.
Yeah, and that the concept of a layman is important because when you've got two similar languages trying to converse with each other, the better educated the speakers are, the more probable their understanding of the other one's variation.
Makes sense.
Like Spanish and Portuguese. I used my Spanish degree to learn Portuguese when I was living in Lisbon, and I made wonderful mistakes all along the way. Saying something in Spanish, thinking it would be similar in Portuguese.
Yeah.
And sometimes it was linguistically similar, and sometimes it was pronounced in a similar fashion, but the definition was quite different, or just dangerously different.
Yeah, just when I think I speak enough Spanish to really tackle Portuguese, I'll then hear something or say something. I'm like, oh, damn it, I'm wrong. I'm wildly wrong. And I'm not studying it. It's just, for casual.
Well, I had fun learning Portuguese and I loved it, but I had to teach myself since my job was to teach English and American history. Well, American English and American history, let me say that more clearly.
In Portuguese?
No, I did things in Portuguese for the Library of Congress when I taught in Brazil at the University of São Paulo. I taught an online name authority course so that the Brazilian National Library could join the Internet name authority source that the Library of Congress was one of the sponsors for. Now that I taught in Portuguese, and I translated the training manual. But in Lisbon, I taught in English, American English, and I was teaching American English and American history, and working for UPI as a stringer. And as often as I could, I put myself in Portuguese immersion, to learn vocabulary, and I made some funny mistakes. And I always used my mistakes in the English classes that I gave the next day to encourage the students to be brave. And if Stuart, the teacher, if Stuart can make stupid mistakes, who's going to laugh at me?
Yeah.
And we would laugh at my mistakes, and then that would open them up somewhat.
Well, question, since you mentioned how different Gaelic, Irish, Scottish are, when you went from Lisbon to Sao Paulo or vice versa, how similar are Brazilian Portuguese and Portugal Portuguese?
That's, in my mind, an easy analogy. It may not be linguistically clean, but an easy analogy would be to say the Brazilians would think of me with my continental European Portuguese, the mother country. They would think of me the way you and I would think of a British butler.
Okay.
My Portuguese was so correct and so Lisbon that they loved it the way we love a British butler.
Okay.
But the same thing, the second part of that love is don't push it. If you try to be pretentious, they'll just turn you off. And if somebody was pretentious in a bar and you overheard them talking, you would be looking for holes in their conversation. You would be looking for reasons to dismiss them because they were trying to use their pronunciation for superiority.
Okay.
And
well, would that be frowned upon even in Portugal? Because I look at them and I think of like coastal, hardworking people. I don't think of the Portuguese as pretentious people. And maybe I don't know a damn thing about the Portuguese, but I don't look at them like that.
They can be, but again, they're aware of the fact that they're a smaller country that had a huge empire.
Yeah.
In fact,
I think about that a lot. That's got to be such a weird feeling.
Well,
Sorry to interrupt you.
They had the first European empire after the Middle Ages.
Okay. Hadn't thought about that.
And I mean, they went down the west coast of Africa. They went out into the Atlantic Ocean as far as they could go for a while. And they went across the top of North Africa and then rounded Cape of Good Hope. It's off South Africa. Then up the East Coast. So, I mean, for example, Natal, South Africa is named for the Portuguese founding on Christmas Day.
Oh, okay.
Natal means Christmas Day in Portuguese.
Okay.
And east coast of South Africa and Mozambique, even parts of Madagascar, which ended up being French. But Mozambique on the east coast and up into Ethiopia. Ethiopia was reached through Egypt by the Portuguese missionaries and up the east coast. And the entire west coast was touched. And factories. The Portuguese word factory means a trading post.
Oh, that's cool.
And that the Portuguese, being a small country, had to depend to some degree upon their superior weapons and their superior strategies. But big time, they had to depend upon treaties with the local lords, the local tribal chiefs. and they would help a tribal chief beat a neighboring tribal chief. That is one of the ways they established some protection for the Portuguese settlements on the west coast of Africa and on the west coast of India, in Portuguese India, Damião, and the big one, Goa.
Okay.
Western India was Portuguese.
And so was Sri Lanka, right?
For a while it was. And the Portuguese name was Ceylon.
Ceylon? Okay.
Ceylon.
What is it? Does that mean anything?
I'm not sure. I didn't dive into Sri Lanka's history, but it was taken from the Portuguese by the British and named Sri Lanka, I think, and then I think it's a separate part of India.
To be honest, I don't know. Couldn't tell you on that. It looks beautiful. It looks like Hawaii.
I know two people who grew up there, and both of them had relatives who had tea plantations, and they were British. But no, Irish Gaelic, Scottish Gaelic. That's why when I talk about them, I normally elaborate and say Irish Gaelic, Scottish Gaelic, unless I'm talking to a Brit. And then I will assume they know the difference. And if they don't, they'll let me know right away.
Would you be able to say whether the Scots or the Irish tend to hold on to that language more these days? I know Gaelic is not a large, language, but
well, in Ireland, it's a part of the national identity.
Okay.
Because Ireland, while being occupied and supposedly conquered, they held on to Catholicism and Gaelic, the two things that they saw as being different from Anglo-Saxon England and the Protestant English aspect in Wales, England, Scotland. And what's ironic, Northern Scotland is still somewhat Catholic, and the wars in Northern Ireland were really unfortunate because the Northern Irish are heavily Scottish because of proximity to the northwest coast of Scotland. The only thing is the water passage there is very choppy and very dangerous. And that's the only thing that kept them from being even more so. And as the Scots, there were Scots there that could communicate and trade between Scotland and Northern Ireland with impunity, except for during the storm. And the Scots were, I wanted to point out that the Scots were being forced off their land as the modern Scotland and modern England were trying to incorporate hunting lodges and larger, more mechanized or more modern sheep farms in Scotland, and the family or the clan ownership of land was being just dissected, and the clan chiefs were selling off their land to make money and betraying their own people. And those people were being forced off the land and crofting in Scottish Gaelic or Scottish English, both, is small farms.
Okay.
Subsistence farming with some crop left over for trade for currency, but mostly just to survive the family. And a lot of Scots were forced off the clan valleys because the clan chiefs were selling them to developers. Scotland has a lot of hunting lodges for foreigners to go and hunt and camp and hike. And those farmers, those crofters, were forced to live on the coast of Scotland, sometimes on rocky cliffs, where they could hardly grow any crops. And many of them were forced to cross the short water distance to Northern Ireland and increase the number of Scottish residents in Northern Ireland. It was a natural location, a natural refuge.
Interesting. Didn't know any of that.
And that's another reason why Northern Ireland speaks a Scottish Gaelic version. It's the next valley over. Only this time there's a water passage that chops it off from the northwest coastline of Scotland. Now you asked about the status of Gaelic in Ireland versus Scotland. In Ireland, again, it's a national symbol, national treasure. And in the 30s, when Ireland gained its independence and had its own new parliament, I believe it's the Dáil, they made Gaelic required in the schools. And then I think they cut back on the requirement and made it. The requirement was that the school had to offer. I think in the beginning in the 30s and 40s, they were forcing it so aggressively that even the Irish were like, why do we have to?
Yeah.
But when they cut back on the forcefulness, I think the Irish then picked it up out of pride, because it is something they're proud of. And the president of Ireland, his title is in Gaelic. It's in Irish Gaelic. And it's in Taoiseach. And it means the leader. In Scots Gaelic, it's Taoiseach. It's very similar.
Where does it come from?
The verb to lead or to begin.
Okay.
And the other word for a leader or a president is ceann suaimh, the seated leader, the seated head. Ceann is head, from which we get kin, as in kintyre and kinloch. Kinloch is the head of the lake or the top of the lake. And kintyre is a peninsula, the head of the lake.
Yeah. Okay.
And so the Irish use Irish quite often. And oftentimes you'll see, I believe it's a national language, like even Scotland has made Scottish Gaelic a national language. So they're offering it. In Scotland, they've got grade schools in Glasgow and I think a couple in Edinburgh that are new. They're immersion classes where the courses are taught in Gaelic or English and Gaelic. But Ireland already has that, and the approach to it is the Scots are learning to be proud of it again, and the Irish always were.
Okay. See, I don't know that my grandparents were proud enough to make my dad learn, but according to my dad, they did speak it, they knew it, and they would use it around the house, just amongst each other. Yeah. And it became one of the things where I think, like a lot of us, as they got older, it was the thing they would curse in, and it was the thing that they would, sit there and just maybe quickly pray in, and then that was about it. It just became less and less, used.
That's neat. I envy people who had parents that spoke a foreign language.
Yeah.
I fell in love with foreign languages because I found them fascinating and bewildering.
See, that's where we're very different, is that I grew up with all my mom's side of the family, everybody spoke some type of foreign language. My mom grew up in West Africa. She spoke French. Both my grandfather grew up in Switzerland. He spoke, God knows, like 4 different things. Everybody, it was so realistic to me to see someone speaking 4 languages. So you came from, what was it, Missouri?
St. Louis.
St. Louis. And then you had no one in your family that was speaking multiple languages.
No, and my introduction to foreign languages, ironically, was when, through my church, missionaries that we sponsored, or partially sponsored, would come home on home leave, and they would always go to the churches that were sponsoring and sending them monthly money. And they would bring their children who spoke the language of the country where they were doing missionary work. And I was fascinated by the missionary children speaking to each other, because they would attend Sunday school with us. And then they'd be in the main church for the service. And their father or their mother, or both, the missionaries, would talk about their experiences, as one would expect missionaries to talk about. And then every now and then the father or the mother would turn to one of the children and say something in the language of the country where they were working. And they would be careful. They didn't do that excessively because it's a bit rude. It makes you think they're saying something about you.
Yeah.
And
that's a natural assumption. Yeah.
Like when I go to have my pedicure because I can't reach my toenails to trim them, the Vietnamese women, I'm sure they're talking about how ugly my feet are. And I keep thinking, I should buy one of those earplugs that translates in other languages.
Oh, that's so funny. I mean, I've gotten a pedicure before, and I felt very insecure. Like immediately.
Was it the one up here in Bradley Shopping Center?
No, I did this, actually, I was supposed to meet my cousin up in Maryland, and she was late. And so randomly I was just in a shopping center where I was like, you know what? I've never done this. And I had a broken foot, months before that. And I was like, I'm going to finally treat my feet well. And I went in there, I was like, okay, I don't like all that chit chatter. I don't think they like me, but that's the best my feet have felt in a very, very long time. So good for you. You get to do it regularly.
Well, I do it like every 2 months.
Nice.
And I am a talker. So I end up talking to the woman that's doing my toes. And one time, the manager of the shop came through and stopped and said something to the woman, and then went on. And I said, was she telling you how ugly my feet are? And the woman cleaning or doing my toenails said, no, she was telling me to stop talking and work faster. And I said, tell her that I started talking. She said, I did. So
that's hilarious.
I haven't tried French on them because they may not be from the educated class, but Vietnamese used to speak French.
True.
For about 400 years.
I didn't know, do they still learn that in Vietnam?
Probably not. There's probably a nationalistic new world.
Yeah, I would think
order.
So. Yeah, I would think so.
But they're not going to learn, I don't think they're going to learn Russian or Chinese either.
No. You had me wondering if Conor McGregor will learn Gaelic if he becomes president of Ireland.
Well, he'll know some already.
You think so?
Sure.
Okay.
I mean, and there's a certain amount of Irish and Scottish Gaelic that they play with.
Yeah.
I mean, expressions that are playful and a little bad, a little naughty. And they do that for fun.
Well, I feel like Irish writing and the way that they talk, and I mean, the whole Limericky nature and everything, there is like naughtiness to the way that the Irish think and write. It seems to go like pretty hand in hand. They love to play with words. I think the Irish are probably the most playful with language. And if I remember correctly, at one point, they have the most Nobel Prize winners for like literature, or Pulitzer Prize winners, whatever it is. Yeah, it was something where Ireland was beat the next person by like 3 or 4, and I thought, okay, cool, it's good for my people, But
yeah, the only thing that I could say in defense of the Scots in that along that line is very few Americans know who's Scottish and who's English.
Yeah, for sure.
They just don't know. Well, that person that you've been calling English is really Scottish.
Yeah.
The Scots were absorbed by the union of the crowns and the union of the parliaments.
But someone who's very Scottish I feel like knows that. Someone who's very Scottish and
they let it go.
Yeah.
Glaswegian will knock you over.
Yeah, I've been confused by someone who I knew was speaking English, but it was not an English that I know. I was like, okay. I said, we got you. We got you.
Well, now that's neighborhood or neighborhood dialects.
I had that with Spanish when I was in Barcelona area.
Oh, I love Catalan.
Yeah, Catalan is beautiful, but it was different enough that there was plenty of things where like, I'm damn confused. In some ways, it was completely different.
Well, and you see, Catalan is so close to Portuguese that when I spoke with a Catalan tourist, we just spoke slowly. And when two languages are close or similar, and you're going to try and communicate in those two languages, both of them, what really helps is if one of the speakers, if not both of them, are educated in language. They know how to interpret. They know how to
Like build
extrapolate.
those bridges and kind of say, oh, this is the topic.
I'll bet that came from.
Yeah.
And
that just becomes, the more languages you know parts of, the easier that becomes in general, too.
Well, it gives you a starting point. Sometimes it can take you down the wrong path.
For sure.
But I've got so many of those little stories from my time in Lisbon. But the Gaelic is very fascinating. And again, I would never promote myself as an authority in any way, shape, or form of the Irish, out of respect. It's just, and I'm not sure if it's more similar spoken or written, because sometimes I have bilingual text, Irish and Scottish, on facing pages, and they just say things differently sometimes. The Scottish Gaelic, I love you, is a gulach amorst. There's love on me for you.
I like that. Okay.
And I'm not sure what the Irish say, but I think it's very different. It's not direct, as in English or French, I love you. And in French, it's I you love, je vous aime, or je t'aime. And in English, it's what you and I know, I love you.
Yeah, it's an expression of my feeling for you.
Right.
As opposed to some languages, love has a hold on me, which has a completely different connotation.
And the French and the Scottish Gaelic both say, they say, please. They don't say, please. They say, if it pleases you.
Yeah, s'il vous plaît.
Right.
Yeah.
And in Scottish Gaelic, Massé do Hale, if it's pleasing with you.
I love that.
Massé do Hale.
You know, this is like somewhat off that path, but I've always loved how, I don't know that it's all Arabs, but in the Arabic language parts that I know, if you want to say nice to meet you, they say forza saida, which literally translates to what a happy coincidence. And I love the idea that, the thought that we would just meet is just, oh, look at that. Like to me, that seems very desert people. You're like, oh yeah, what are the chances you would just pass? You would go across somebody.
There was a very beautiful, perky, fun Portuguese teacher at the Cambridge School in Lisbon, where I taught my first year before switching to the American Institute. And I can't remember her name, but she was beautiful and inside and out. And she had grown up in Paris because her family fled the Salazar dictatorship in Portugal.
Okay.
Which was the dictatorship that fell to the revolution in 1974, which opened up Portugal for the modern government.
Just reminded me how little I know about Portugal.
Well, we Americans don't study a country unless we have a war with it.
True. Yeah.
I mean, we just don't seem to.
I know more about Portugal during the Armada than I know about Portugal now.
Well, and people don't realize Portugal was part of the Armada because Philip II had inherited the Portuguese crown.
You told me this story once. I remember that.
Through his wife, Isabel. And Isabel was a little eccentric or dangerous, one of the two, hard to know which. And the, the Spanish crown had her labeled crazy and locked her up. So that Philip II, her husband, in her place, inherited the Portuguese crown.
Interesting.
For her. He said, well, I'll take it. Well, Portuguese, by country club rules, said Isabel should inherit because the last Portuguese king died without an heir. Or, yes, and one of his brothers died without an heir that he could claim because he was a cardinal. Couldn't admit that he had a child. Another brother was lost at the Battle of Gibraltar in either Tunisia or Algeria, fighting the Moors. And that's Sebastian.
Okay.
And that's the great mythological, idealistic legend of Portugal waiting for Sebastian to return. Because he went missing in the battle. And there are stories of people, much like the Russian daughter, the Tsar's daughter, that they say wasn't killed.
Yeah.
And they had pretenders show up. Every 5 to 15 years, another pretender would show up claiming to be
Anastasia.
Thank you. And Sebastian had a couple of those. Showed up. One of them, I think, showed up at the royal court in Italy, and trying to claim to be the missing Portuguese heir to the throne. But since he was gone, nobody knew where he was. They didn't find his body. The Portuguese surrendered their crown to Philip II, who ironically is confusing because he became Philip I of Portugal.
Okay.
And he had two titles: Philip II of Spain, Philip I of Portugal. And Philip II, third and fourth of Spain, called the Época dos Philippes, the period of the Philips. And that's when the Spanish took the Philippines from the Portuguese. And the French, Spanish, and English raided the Portuguese colonies because the Spanish were mismanaging the Portuguese military forces and the colonies. And that's where you've got 3 Guineas in North Africa, in northern South America, cut out of the top of Brazil. That's what's left from the incursions of other European kingdoms, taking advantage of Portugal being on its knees momentarily. And one of the reasons why the Portuguese colonies were not well defended, Spain didn't want to defend them or didn't care unless there was a certain trade reason. But the Portuguese Navy had been sent with the Spanish Navy to attack England. And it was part of the Spanish Armada that was destroyed by the storm. The storm and the English fleet. The most important thing the English did was the fire ships. They sent smaller ships on fire into the formation of the Spanish and Portuguese Armada. And the Spanish and Portuguese battleships caught fire. And they were torn apart in their formations by the storm. It was a huge storm that many people say saved England. And then the other thing that we get out of the Spanish Armada, many historians believe this to be true, and I think it's so fun, I believe it. That's where we get the Black Irish. If a Spanish or Portuguese sailor was washed up on the Irish shore, he was protected because he was Catholic. And he was kept. And you just didn't get on the next plane home.
Yeah.
So they were kept and hidden and intermarried. And the dark features of the Spanish and Portuguese were, the Irish had some, but the Gaelic say Gial or Ban, and for a blonde or a pale person, and then that's white and pale. And it also normally means blonde. So, blue eyes. Sullivan is a clan name, and it means blue eyes. Sulin Van. Sul is an eye. Sulin eyes. Sulin, and because it's feminine, the bond becomes Van. Sulin Van, Sullivan. And they were probably blonde or pale. The man or the group that gave their name, their features to the name, to the clan, were probably blonde.
That's fascinating.
So, and the Macintoshes were the leaders of a consortium of 5 clans in northern Scotland. And that's just the sons of the leader, Macintosh.
That's right. It comes back to the Intosh.
Right. Macintosh.
That's cool. Which is hence why we have Macintosh, the computer company.
Now, as the computer company, I don't know if it's because what was one of their names or they decided to lead the industry.
It's got to be related to leader. That's a perfect correlation. I'll look into it. I'll insert it later, but I'm willing to almost die on that hill right now.
Well, it would make
that
sense.
Sounds pretty good.
It'd be another interesting aspect.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, and then the words from one language to the next that are similar, that very, very wonderful and fun Portuguese woman who was my age or younger, who had returned from Paris to live with her grandparents after the Salazar regime died. And she came into the teacher's room one day and said, well, I'm teaching French, I'm teaching Portuguese, and one would think I'd manage them better. And somebody said, well, what happened? She said, well, I was with a Portuguese boyfriend, who had not grown up in Paris. We were walking down the main avenue, the Avenue of Liberty. And another boyfriend of hers that she happened to be seeing periodically also, who had grown up in France, like she. And she looked up and she goes, oh, para azar encontramos-nos. By chance, we bump into each other. Para azar encontramos-nos. And the other guy goes, well, I can leave. But she goes, what did I say? Well, para azar in French means by chance. But in Portuguese, it means damn luck.
Oh, that's great.
And she had said, well, ain't that damn luck to bump into you?
That's perfect.
And she goes, I don't know how I'm going to get around that one. She said, he may not be as linguistically oriented as I am.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that.
But it's those similarities that, no, we don't say that. We don't use that word here.
Well, I think I had told you that I was once at dinner with an ex-girlfriend, and her dad cursed so liberally at the table. And it didn't, like, it was one of those words.
In English?
No, in Spanish. And it wasn't kind of like how, in English, fuck is the most versatile, and it can be used in aggressive ways. It wasn't as if I could tell, oh, he's clearly saying this,
Yeah.
But at one point, then I'm like, days later sitting at the table and mom's there. And I said something, of course, like looking at like the little brother. And the mom looked up and I could immediately tell, oh, I've done something wrong. I don't know what, but I've said a bad word. And then I saw the daughter kind of look at me like, oh, yeah, we don't do that when mom's at the table. Like, that's one of the words you just don't say. I was like, oh, okay.
Dad uses it.
Yeah, Dad uses that. Dad's the fun one. Dad's the one you can do anything.
No, that's typical.
It is.
Language application in families.
Yeah, I had friends that told me about how they've had to figure out how to tell their kids And I think everybody goes through this where it's like, okay, listen, that word, not outside the house. That word, not over there. That word, like, please no. Because they're not going to pretend anymore that their kids won't say the thing. That's it.
No, absolutely.
You have so many books on the history of language. It's ridiculous.
Well,
I mean, I love it. It's my favorite thing about like being here. When I see you got the map over here, this over here, it's just cool. I love this. You're my favorite person to talk to about foreign language.
I was walking, my posters, I got from poster men on the street. That one and the one for the concert at the University of Lisbon in the bedroom. I got it 2 different times, walking past the Feira de Lisboa, the city fair, which was just nothing but food stands and small restaurants from all the different provinces in Portugal. And games and merry-go-rounds and horse rides. That it was a year-round fair. And on the outside walls, they would come along with their brush on the end of a broom and a bucket of some kind of sticky water. And they would wipe the wall, put the poster up with their left hand holding like a scraper on the handle. And then they would whitewash with the brush in the water, the poster, and it would stick.
Okay.
It would stick to the wall. And they would just walk along. They could do this. I mean, they were so adept at it. There were little men that were given these jobs because they didn't have a job. And they just learned how to put those posters up. They could put up a poster in 20 seconds.
That's cool. That's cool.
I was walking along with a handball team that I played with for practice. I'd met the handball team at a late night restaurant in the Santos area of Lisbon. And because I was longing to learn Portuguese, I said hi to them and they adopted me. Well, here's our American toy.
A token gringo here.
And they would teach me all kinds of words. And they were constantly joking amongst themselves. Well, I was walking with them from practice one day over to the restaurant, and we walked past this man putting the posters up. And I walked up to him, and they were like, "Stuart, where are you going? Onde vai?" And I said, "Vou falar com este senhor. I want to talk to this gentleman." They said, "Mas por que? Why?"
What business have you?
And I said, "I want one of those posters."
Oh, and that's how you got that?
And I got it from the little man. He just rolled the next one off his roll of posters and gave it to me.
That's awesome. That's so cool.
And the same thing happened with the University of Lisbon poster in the bedroom.
That's awesome. Well,
and these my friends were like, well, you know how it is. The most common or the most unimpressive but natural item. Like I remember sitting in a restaurant once, and I loved the ashtray.
And, yeah, I can get that.
And the ashtray, this was some time ago, and the ashtray had the name of the restaurant. And it was like a ceramic ashtray. And the waitress came over and I said, in Portuguese, "Should I steal this or would you let me buy it?" And she said, "Well, let me ask the manager." And I said, "Oh, no.
This is happening now here.
This is you and me, this ashtray. And she goes, "Oh, steal it." And I said, "Okay, thank you. I'll put a little extra money in the gorjeta."
I love that.
In the tip.
I can do language stories with you forever, but for one, I did not plan this well, so sitting at this angle is not really tenable for much longer. And
for you.
For me at all. I'm sure you are. I'm sure you are. Anybody who ever watches this is going to watch like the quarter side of my head for most of this talk. which is my least favorable of all versions of me.
Well, I don't like any photo of me.
Fair. I get that. Look, I had to watch myself an uncomfortable amount of hours on screen for my comedy and all that nonsense. So I'm over the shame of watching me, but I still I hate hearing myself just not. It's like blah 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 nonstop.
I'm sure I'm not going to like it.
But let me ask you this: what you've kind of stayed within the romance, and I mean, nothing. Gaelic isn't romance. I don't think. Or I don't consider it that.
No.
But you stayed within the category of that region of the world languages. Is there one language that you would have liked to explore, or just was far out there that maybe you didn't have a reason to, but it really intrigued you?
Sign language.
Really? Okay.
I would have loved to have learned sign language.
Oh, that's a great answer.
And I never got to it.
Damn. Yeah, I love that.
One of the reasons for that was I lived on Capitol Hill in the 70s for 10 years.
Were you near Gallaudet?
Well, the Gallaudet students came down to Mr. Henry's and the Hawk and Dove and the restaurants on Pennsylvania Avenue. And when I would see them sitting there, I'm so Midwestern friendly, it's disgusting. I would always want to run over and help them with the menu.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, all I'm going to do if I go over to help is add one more layer of incomprehension
to the whole situation. Yes.
Oh, no. Let me pass that which I don't understand to this person who's not going to understand.
Yes. 2 translators is always better.
Let me help. Let me get my foot in the door here. And I do remember one time at the library, I went to lunch in the cafeteria. And this was one of the times when I realized I need to learn sign language because I was repeating a spicy story about myself and a date that I'd had.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked up and there was a deaf employee of the library sitting there just reading my lips from like one or two tables over.
That's
just smiling. And I can't believe I did that.
That's so funny.
I can't believe I laid my soul out at lunch. And this guy knows more about me than the people I talk to. But so that was just, and again, it goes back to my grandma's church. Well, my church.
Mm-hmm.
My church was missionary work and languages they brought. But my grandma's church was of the same denomination and same missionary support. So I had that language presented by the children of the missionaries. But my grandma's church had one more level.
What was that?
There's a very well-regarded St. Louis School of the Deaf. And the assistant director of the St. Louis School of the Deaf just happened to be a Southern Baptist minister and went to my grandma's church.
Oh, no kidding.
So he, almost every Sunday, had a separate pulpit off to the side. And that whole section of the audience was for the deaf. And he would sign the entire sermon.
That's really ahead of its time.
And I was sitting there and I would ask Grandma, can I go sit with the deaf? And she would say, no, you be quiet. And I go, well, who am I going to talk to? But I would go and I would look at his signals and his gestures. Because as I understand it, American Sign is based on symbols and gestures. I mean, sun coming up in the morning, rather than Chinese.
Bro, do you know something cool? I learned this. The language with which preserves the most of any, or maybe it's collective, Native American languages is sign language.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, it was like river, raccoon, tons of outdoor related things.
Well, of course.
Were all already made up or had reason to be known and spoken. And so whenever it was adopted, that was something they drew from a bunch. In fact, I want to say the number's as high as like 17%. It was a huge, huge percentage of Native American.
Well, I know that I was, when I was working at the IMF, downtown Washington, we had a 2-floor rental in a building across 2 blocks from the main building. And language translation services where I was the assistant librarian, and some of the accounting offices were over there. And I got on the elevator one day, and this very elegant, large African man got on, and and it was a Saturday, so I had my proudly emblazoned Mizzou University, black and gold sweatshirt. And he goes, Mizzou. Well, I said, yes. And he goes, you do not look South African. And I said, well, I'm not. And he said, well, Mizzou sounds just like the Zulu word for, I don't remember, but it was a Zulu word. And I'm sorry. It just drew a blank.
No, you're good. Was it something that would have warranted having a shirt or a jersey on?
Well, it was a good thing.
Okay.
It was a positive term. And he said, so I assume you are not from South Africa. Said, no, but I'm proud to be from Mizzou. And he was, I can't remember what it was, but I said, well, how interesting that it would mean something that nice in a totally different language. And he said, well, you know how that goes. In Africa, with the forests, we have 12 ways of saying green. And I said, I never thought of that. And he said, well, we need 12 different ways because there's at least 12 different greens in forests of Africa. That makes perfect sense.
Well, that's like the Eskimos with snow. I think even the Russian language for snow or cold has an absurd amount. They also have a lot for love.
The Russians?
Yeah, the Russians have a lot. The Russian language is very, very in depth. Like, yes, English might have more words, but the Russian language, especially when it comes to feelings and emotion, they were very, very in depth.
Well, is it like German where they put words together to create a word?
I don't believe so. I don't think that they stack on like that. I just know that if you were to read, for people who have told me that can read Dostoevsky? Is that how you say his name? If you can read that in the original Russian, I'm told that it's just a very, very a heavier experience. Again, I don't speak a lick of Russian beyond hey, how are you? What's up? So I don't really know.
Yeah, my experience with studying Russian was that in one of my early Gaelic classes, Christina Edwards, I shall remember this young lady forever. She was so sweet and so kind and so bright, so annoyingly bright. She would come to Scottish Gaelic class with her Russian books in Russian. And I said, so, Scottish Gaelic's not enough for you? And she'd say, well, it's challenging. But I've been studying Russian for years.
I've heard Russian's incredibly difficult.
Especially if you're reading it in Cyrillic.
Yes, I think that's one of the big breakers for anybody that speaks English first, is just reading outside of the actual alphabet that you're used to. I don't speak German, but I could speak German.
Yeah.
I got no problem reading it and telling you what's going on. I just don't have a clue what you're telling me to say. And same with, I don't know, I guess even Icelandic, you could kind of work your way through Icelandic.
Oh, I have no idea.
It's all just same letters like we have. It's just really crazy different words. I think they have one of the I's with double dots above it or something, but there's not a lot of difference.
Do you know who has the Western alphabet now because of French missionaries and can't read their own ancient language?
It's going to be in Africa, right? No? Who? I don't know.
The Vietnamese.
No shit.
They're the only ones that have the Western alphabet because of the French missionaries.
Okay, I did know that. I forgot about that, but I did know that.
And there's a certain point in history, like 400 or 500 years back, where the French influence started to take over.
So nobody there reads that language anymore.
Well, they study it.
Yeah. Oh, I haven't ever thought about it.
University students study it, but their newspapers are with the Western alphabet.
Interesting. What is the Gaelic alphabet? Is that, I know that's still kind of our alphabet, but they have some.
Well, they have a very elaborate, artistic alphabet, but they don't have all of the letters that we have. They accommodate certain combinations, certain phoneme clusters create a sound.
See, those are the things that, even though I feel like, can you game me one of those words on linguistic terminology? I still don't feel like I can pull out phony clusters or phoneme clusters like just out of my head when I start talking about something. I know what they are visually, but I can't sit there and say, oh, yeah, well, this language has this, this, and this.
Well, for example, in Scots Gaelic, the suffix on a verb, idh or aidh, they're both pronounced e, and that's a phoneme cluster.
Okay.
And the reason why there's an a and an I takes you to another rule in Scottish Gaelic. If the verb's last vowel is a broad vowel, AOU, or if it's a slender vowel, E or I, you have to match the ending. If the last vowel in the verb, of course I'm not going to think of one now, is an A, you're going to finish the verb with whatever consonant follows that A and put AIDH. But if the last vowel in the body of the verb is an E or an I, you're going to put IDH. So the AIDH matches up to broad vowels, and the IDH matches up to slender vowels in the body of the main verb. But the sound is identical. Toshaki, I will leave. Toshaki me, I will leave. And that's TOISICHIDH, because the last ICH requires an IDH. If it had been, for example, ACH, Smunyache, think. I mean, Smunyache Guvershin. I think that's it. You're going to Smunyache ADH would have an AIDH for the future ending. Smunyache E. Pronunciation is still E. And they have a rule in Scottish Gaelic, broad to broad, slender to slender. They don't like to have too many vowels clustered together. They want broad, consonant, broad, slender, consonant, slender. So they adhere to that. It does help you sometimes when you learn to master the art of spelling anything in Scottish Gaelic. How do they do this?
Yeah.
Why do they do this?
The why.
Why do they do this?
I hope that my audio on this was good, because I want to remember all of this for another period of time. So okay. I'm never going to stop talking to you about this, but thanks for sitting down and talking about this for as long as you did. Appreciate it. It's very interesting to me. I have no idea.
Did we do an hour?
Probably an hour and 9 minutes.
69.
69. Yes.